Welcome to Breakthrough with Champs. Today I have the one and only Darren Lacroix, who is a 2001 World Champion of Public Speaking and the founder of Stage Time University. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. So, before Toastmasters, you used to be a comedian, right?
Correct.
And you
a wannabe comedian.
Right, and you always talk about how a failure you were as a comedian. I don't buy that because you're always funny.
Well, thank you, very kind. But at the very beginning, when anybody's learning any skill, and this was a skill that was very much out of my comfort zone. I was not a natural. So you know, people see me now, but to see me when I first started, it was horrible and painful. I was just someone who was willing to, I found the best teachers. I read every book I could, but most importantly, I listened to my mentors. And they said, anytime that you don't get on stage is a day that you don't grow. And I took that seriously. And so that's why I came across Toastmasters. I got every stand-up comedy night, open mic night I could, and eventually I learned the patterns. I understood the patterns and created the presence, which took me years to do.
Right. So now it feels like you own the topic of humor in the speaking world. So I want to ask you a little bit about humor. So why is it so important to have humor in your speech?
Well, I think humor just opens us up to enjoyment, and when we're opened up enjoyment, we create a connection. You know, when two people laugh or smile over something, like a bond is created. So when you can infuse your message in humor, the whole message becomes more sticky. So it's either through emotion or through humor or a combination of both. And so I just think it's so important for the learning process. We're more likely to retain it and hear us. There's a great quote that I love by a sales guru named Jeffrey Gitomer. And he says, at the height of laughter, after the laughter is the height of listening. After the laughter is the height of listening. So that's when we're like leaning in because you have us engaged. So it's about engagement.
Kind of invites other people to listen to you.
Yeah, it gets people to like open their ears and want to hear what you're going to say, and that's when you slide in your message.
Right. So it sounds easy to do when you talk about it, but I think it's really, really difficult skill to earn. Just like you said, it took you years to master the skills. So I hear that you can't really plant the humor in the speech, but you have to uncover the humor in the speech or in the message. How do you do that?
Well, that's I learned that idea. Like Craig Valentine says that so brilliantly. You don't infuse the humor. You don't have it's detour-free humor, as Craig says. And what we're doing is we're saying the humor in the story, in the message, but we need to uncover it and find it, and usually it's in the dialogue between the characters. And so many people, I've seen it even in the World Championship, where they take a joke that they heard on the internet, they think it's funny, and then they try to force it into their story, but A, it's not yours. And B, just like that, it's almost like we got to go way over here and then come back to continue the story, so it's not natural.
Right. So what's the difference? We often mix up humor and joke. What's the difference, if there's any?
Well, a joke is a punchline. Now, in some stories, there can be good punchlines, but when I realized when I really just wasn't a comedian, even though I loved it, even though I learned so much from that experience, I realized that comedy cuts down, humor lifts up. Humor is a release of tension. So humor lifts up. If you're cutting things down, there's a victim. There's somebody who gets hurt. And that's why, you know, if you're in a comedy club, it's almost like we accept that. We're in a place where that's acceptable. But when you're on a stage professionally, we don't want to see you being mean or hurting someone. Now, if a character in a story does, there's a purpose behind it if it's done well. So that's why, you know, a joke is a setup and a punchline, irrelevant from a story. So for us, it's more powerful if it's within a story, or, you know, it doesn't mean you can't use a joke, but we just have to be careful about who's the victim of the story.
Right. Okay.
Or the punchline, I should say.
Right. So in other words, jokes are something that the sole purpose is to make someone laugh without meaning or
Correct.
without a solid goal or purpose. Whereas humor has a purpose and it's infused with a message.
Yeah, it's the release of tension. So in a story, like, or even in my world championship speech, when I was laying on the ground and I didn't get up, it was intentionally to create tension. So when I said, Mr. Toastmaster, it released the tension. But you have to create tension in order to relieve it. So like when I was practicing at different Toastmaster clubs, people said, oh, you should get up sooner, you should get up sooner. Well, when I went to my coach, Mark Brown, he said, stay down longer.
That's my coach too.
Stay down longer, because that's more likely, that's going to create tension and then relieve it. So if you just relieve a little bit of tension, it's not as big of a laugh.
Right,
so it works together. And, you know, tension
maximize the tension up to the very top and then release it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've been talking about Toastmaster speeches, speech contests. Well, speech contest is one thing, but when you're in business, it's a different type of speech. That whether it's a sales speech or top presentation, it's not inspirational speeches or Toastmasters contest speeches. So in business, it's a different as to how you can use humor in the speech.
Well, I wouldn't say it's different. I would say your audience is different, so the humor that you use is different. So, for example, in my humor boot camps, one of the things we teach people is, for your audience, where's the tension and how can we relieve it? So let's say if you're speaking to a group of entrepreneurs. So if we're speaking to a group of entrepreneurs, what's their frustration? Well, it's, you know, keeping their business alive. It's always trying to do more selling. It's the employees. If we're talking to a group of frontline employees, it's the regulations of the industry. It's the bosses. It's the owner of the business. Well, there's different things that create that tension. So we have to be aware of who's in our audience and what's in their world that we can find that tension and then relieve it.
Okay. So I'm a professional speaker and I speak fine, but I'm not funny. And I'm sure you hear this a lot, but how can I train myself to be funnier?
Well, that's a great question. And it's not that you're not funny, it's that we just haven't found your funny bone yet. So we have to look for it. So I'm a big fan of study your favorite comedian or humorous speaker. Who's like the person that you just think is great? Well, like, I love Billy Crystal. He's funny as an actor, but as a comedian, his comedy doesn't resonate with me. Now, he's world class. He, like, everybody knows him. He's famous. But that doesn't mean my humor aligns with his. If you study the person who you love the most, who makes you laugh, you'll realize there's a commonality of that sense of humor. So I learned early on to study the people who make you laugh. Because just like when I studied the World Championship speeches, early on in my stand-up, I studied my favorite comedians, Robin Williams and Stephen Wright. But when I watched them over and over again, I could start to see the jokes, their perspective, how they put it together. So it just means you haven't been trained in that area yet, you know, just like me. I had to learn it.
Right.
And some people are naturally funny, and I hate them too, because it came natural.
I know, it's not fair.
It's not fair. But we each, you know, if you took a very funny person, they could not dance the way you dance.
Right.
However, you trained in that area.
Right.
You weren't as great as you were
And
at the
I wasn't
beginning.
born dancing. So.
Right. So it's the same thing.
Right.
So it's a different skill set, and yes, some people can learn it faster and easier than others. But if you want to learn it, it's learnable.
I see. So when you study a favorite comedian, does the gender matter? For example, if
No.
I'm a female, I should watch female comedian?
No, not at all. It's the sense of humor. It's their perspective and the topics that they talk about and the perspective, like their angle. That's what you resonate with. If it's somebody who's like sharp and cutting and sarcastic, and that makes you laugh, it means that deep inside you want to be
Right.
dark and cutting and sarcastic.
Yeah.
It's just finding that person, and it doesn't mean you're going to take on their style. It just means that it's a great style, and because you think that person is funny, you're more likely to work harder. You're
Right.
more likely to watch it 12 times instead of just 4.
Right.
When I studied the other world champions, I learned more when I watched it the 5th, the 6th, the 7th time than I did the first time, because the first time I'm just caught up in it. So if you like the comedian, you're more likely to study more. Or
Right.
funny, like Jeannie Robertson is brilliant, like one of the funniest storytellers, and she's not a comedian. She's a humorous speaker.
Right. Right. I guess when you study someone, you really learn that person's style, and you're going to discover your own style too.
It will help be the key to your own voice
Yeah.
and your own style.
Right.
And perspective.
Yeah, because eventually you have to develop your own style, because you can't be someone else. You're just you.
Absolutely.
Right? So finally, some quick do's and don'ts of humor.
Well, number 1, don't try too hard. Don't try to be funny. It's like the audience can sense it. If like, okay, here's a joke, here's a punchline, and it's like
Laugh.
if you're overdoing it and
Right.
trying to point it out, it's just going to make it worse.
Yeah, it's going to be a disconnect. Right?
For me, here was the key, because I started in stand-up comedy and came over to the toastmaster world. For me, I would go in and I would try a new story at my toastmaster club, and if one person, just at the right time, when I wanted to create that laugh, if one person would go, huh, I knew I was onto something. See, the average toastmaster would be like, huh, that wasn't funny, and they'd go and write a new speech. That's the wrong idea. It's work on it, work on it, work on it. So if I got that little indicator that worked, even though it was just a huh, I was like, okay, I just need to make it clearer.
Right.
It means the spark is there.
Right.
So great comedy, great humor isn't written, it's rewritten. Sometimes it could be simple as raising an eyebrow or maybe a look, and you don't know what it is, but you need to experiment with it. A real comedian, a headlining comedian, if they're trying a new joke, they'll try it at 3 or 4 different comedy clubs the same way before they determine if they're going to throw it away or not. Because sometimes it is the crowd.
Right.
Sometimes it was you had an off night. So really it's like the 3rd or 4th audience, then you're either getting that spark and you're determined you're going to figure out how to make it work. But once you get it working, then it becomes this beautiful gold. Like, a lot of people have heard my Subway joke, took a $60,000 debt, and in 6 short months I doubled that. Well, I wrote that back in 1992.
Wow.
And I've been using that
Right.
for over 20 years now. But in front of the right audience, especially entrepreneurs, it works. Why? Because they can relate emotionally to that joke, to the struggle of being an entrepreneur. But even regular audience, it still works. Well, that time and effort that I put in back in 1992 to get it worded just right is still paying me dividends 20 years later. And most people don't look at it. They're like, oh, this is a lot of work. Well, yeah, it is. That's why once you get something to work, it's beautiful and you can use it for years to come.
Right. So there's no shortcut. You have to work on it,
Yeah.
work on it, and work on it.
But here's the secret. A lot of people don't realize that there's exercises that comedians go through to create their material. So, whether it's a book, stand-up comedy, the book, or the comedy Bible, or my program, Get More Laughs by Next Week, there's patterns and exercises that comedians don't want you to know are out there. But I could show you some famous Robin Williams jokes that's an actual formula that comedians use. So there are templates and formulas out there, so learn them, use them,
Right.
test them out.
And here's the source. So they can get them at Stagetime University.
StageTimeUniversity.com. It's part of my presentation mastery program, the Get More Laughs. Humor is one of the keys.
Okay, I'm on it. All right, well, thank you so much,
Hey,
Darren.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching.
Stage time, stage time, stage
Stage
time.
time.